Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, The End of Neutrality, Counselors as Social Change Agents, with Anna Puig, Scholar and Research Director in the Office of Educational Research, College of Education at the University of Florida, and Latoya Haynes-Toby, Assistant Professor of Counselor Education at the University of Connecticut. Before we get started, I want to mention that this webinar is being recorded. And if you miss any portion of this presentation, you can find the video on www.springerpub.com 5 to 7 business days post-event. And importantly, if you have any questions during the presentation, please type them in the Q&A box on your Zoom control panel. I'll bring them up at the end of the presentation. And if you forget to ask a question, there will be a brief survey sent at the end of the webinar, and you can include your question there. Now, without further ado, we'll turn the time over to Anna and Latoya.
Good afternoon, and thank you. So before we begin, we would like to start a bit with a caveat. So it's important for us to remember that all opinions shared during this session belong to us, Dr. Puig and myself, the speakers. We are not representing Springer Publishing or our respective universities. One of the things that really helped us as we thought about the work that we're discussing today is a quote by Eldridge Cleaver. And I'll read it with you. There is no more neutrality in the world. You either have to be part of the solution or you're going to be part of the problem. And it really centers what we do as counselors and what our work is in terms of our practice and also our work as advocates. And I'll skim through the abstract just a little bit. In the face of heightened oppressive legislation against already marginalized and disenfranchised groups in the United States in an increasingly hostile political landscape, this webinar will highlight and center the roles of advocacy, social justice, and intersectionality in foundational counselor education pedagogy and the formation of counselors as social change agents. Emancipatory communitarianism, the ACA advocacy competence and elements of social justice will be discussed alongside the multicultural, and social justice counseling competencies, implications for multiculturally competent counseling practice, and advocacy of counselors as social change agents will be addressed. So what you can expect us to explore today are 3 key themes: emancipatory communitarianism, ACA advocacy, and multicultural and social justice counseling competencies, as well as social change and advocacy in action. And I invite you to think about a few things as we explore this discussion. One being, when did you first think about professional counseling as a career path? When did you first begin to think about this? What life events, experiences, or memories do you bring that inform your worldview and how you envision approaching your work with your clients? What aspects of your personhood and identities might be helpful for you? What aspects might get in the way? How do you intend to take care of yourself as you navigate the journey of counselor education and practice? And so that brings us to the work that we spent time and just really feel really proud of and hope that you will as well. Foundations of becoming a professional counselor. Counselors in training should be exposed to and really challenged to not only be introduced to, but stretch themselves and lean into sometimes difficult conversation and the difficult work of reckoning with the historical and deeply personal traumas of disenfranchised and marginalized peoples in our country and around the world. It'll require us to really engage in the unpacking of privilege and at times the accompanying complicit silence that needs to be centered in counselor education. It's widely known that by the year 2040, the US in numbers will be a majority minority country. And so that means that our students, the very need for them to be prepared is going to be an ever-facing confrontation of being a need to be prepared to serve folks of all religions, spiritualities, worldviews, races, ethnicities, sexual and affectional orientations, and the various gender identities in a world that continues to evolve, change, and become ever connected in ways that we could not have imagined. I'd even argue in such beautiful ways that we need to be able to respond and provide support. So counselors in training should be exposed to liberatory approaches and frameworks, not just to sit with what is happening. We're not working with our clients to sit with the experiences of oppression and teaching them how to do that, but really, how do we engage in the liberatory approaches, and how do we really engage that in our practice of advocacy? Counselors in training should learn to integrate advocacy, social justice, and intersectionality wherever is relevant. And so that's going to mean a real requirement to have those key features present across curriculum, right, and across our training. And so we encourage counselors to embrace the principles of emancipatory communitarianism.
Thank you so much, Dr. Haynes-Tobey. So good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us. We want to lay the foundation for the work that we believe needs to guide counselor educators. We are aware that there may be counselors in training here, professional counselors, or counselor educators. So we want to attend to our audience. And so in our discussion, we are going to center the idea of emancipatory communitarianism as a lens that counselor educators can use to teach students how to approach their understanding of theoretical frameworks, right? Which is very introductory in our profession. Usually the first courses that you will take in your first semester are either going to be intro to counseling, counseling theories, and ethics, in order to begin that laying of the foundation of what you are going to be learning and how you are going to be learning it. We believe the work of Isaac Prilotensky, who is at the University of Miami, by the way, is central because he is a community psychologist, and he has advanced the idea that we cannot counsel clients in isolation and just as a one-on-one in individual formats. We encounter clients in that way most often, and also in groups, which we will attend to in our discussion. But we want to introduce EC to students at the very beginning of their journey. Why is that? Because it is a way for them to approach the theoretical frameworks that they will learn about and that they will use in the course of their developing counselor self-identity, right? I wanted to highlight an article that I wrote with a former student who is now a counselor educator, Dr. Michael Brubaker, that is featured in the Counselor Education and Supervision Journal, where you can actually learn how we took this concept of EC and applied it in a counseling theories class. So I invite you to look that up and check it out. Now, let's talk about EC as a framework. This approach highlights both the individual and collective perspectives. It is a both and focus. It's not an either or focus. It's not that you only attend to the individual client. It's that you need to figure out a way to show up in empathetic ways that support the individual client, or if you're a counselor educator, your students, in ways that also attend to the contextual understanding of where the client lives, where the students live. What are the ways that we can integrate the multicultural and social justice competencies that we teach our students so that they can show up in session and attend to all those concepts that are central and important in a client presentation? We argue as counselor educators that the contextual awareness is critical, and it is also critical, and I think Dr. Haynes-Tobey also alluded to this, that we bring multiple identities, both visible and invisible, into the counseling room. So we are inviting you to consider, how do you show up? How do your clients show up? And how do you unpack all of that in real time as you are trying to support your clients, right? These are critical to also creating a therapeutic relationship and an alliance that the client can feel supported in, and will advance your ability to be the best possible counselor that you can be for your client, which is the goal of all counselors, right? So we know 70% of the world's cultures are collectivistic in nature. That includes in the United States, indigenous, Black, Latin, and Asian groups. So chances are, and you learn this from the get-go, that when you sit across another human, they're going to be different from you. So how do you show up, and how do you show up in a way that takes those differences and doesn't allow them to become barriers in the work that you do? So emancipatory communitarianism attends to both individual and collectivistic perspectives. And Prill-Tensky helped us to understand that there are obstacles we need to attend to. There are things that can get in the way. One of those is the notion that when we meet a client, we focus on the distress that their lived experience is causing. We don't focus on the underlying roots of that distress. And for many clients who come from disenfranchised or marginalized groups, the distress may be rooted in systemic oppression or marginalization or forces in their social networks that are bigger than they are. So how do we attend to both the client, their presentation, and all of those forces? Well, the other problem that can become an obstacle is that we frame client problems from a deficit model. A lot of the theoretical frameworks that we learn about are individualistic in nature, and they focus on what's wrong. They don't focus on what the potential for the client may be. Arguably, there are postmodern theories that do that. That's beyond the scope of our presentation. But what we want to do is highlight the obstacles that we see that need to be overcome by counselors and their clients. So we don't want to ignore the social dimension of clients' lives. We want to promote frameworks that promote emancipation and liberation. And they do so by figuring out ways that we can make the experience of the client better. We know that societal transformation is a larger issue and a larger call, and some counselors may embrace that and may choose to participate in that kind of advocacy. We will talk about that a little bit later. But even in small ways, we can make clients' lives better by attending to these things. Prill-Tensky believes there's a gap between what we know about oppression and then how to address it in the counseling room. These are very challenging conversations, to be sure, and as counselors, we need to be able to broach them. We know that it is difficult for counselors that have not been trained in these models to attend to these issues in session. So how do we deal with these? Okay, well, emancipatory communitarianism addresses and contends the notion that the personal is political and that unjust policies that are present in societies that we inhabit that are maybe invisible to us or that we are not privy to could be some of the root causes that create distress for clients. How do we make that connection to address in helpful ways? How do we make the covert explicit for clients? How do we invite them to be vulnerable with us and create a safe space where they can explore their experiences of marginalization, prejudice, discrimination, or even erasure? So EC argues that counselors bring their own values, right, that we choose to live by, and that those things are going to manifest in the session, whether we want to have them manifest or not. Our values need to be congruent with what we believe to be a good society. Why is that? Because if we hold values that somehow contribute to the marginalization of individuals and members of our society, then how can we be helpful to clients who are experiencing those oppressions? We need to be able to hold that tension between being too dogmatic or too relativistic. One is inflexible, the other one is too relaxed. How do we find the balance? How do we work with our values and have them complement what it is that we are aiming to do, right? And the interventions that we're trying to deliver to our clients that face us in session. Prilotensky said it, and I'm going to read his quote to highlight the underlying philosophy of this model. He believes that caring should complement justice, that collaboration should complement democratic participation, and that human diversity should complement self-determination. So again, both and. And the example he gives is that we cannot say that we value the health of all beings without providing them access to adequate preventative or interventive medical resources. And our society, of course, we struggle with that at a national level. Self-determination cannot be promoted without justice and access to social resources. Both and are important. So, the ACA advocacy competencies paired up with the lens of emancipatory communitarianism, we believe, can be foundational for counselor education, counselor training from the very beginning. For many of us, we didn't see any of these topics until we got to the multicultural counseling class. And we believe deeply in the idea that these principles need to be embedded in all training across all courses in meaningful ways that the clients can benefit from, that the counselors in training can learn to apply in the sessions. So the advocacy competencies have a history with the American Counseling Association in the 1990s. Think about that. The counseling profession is over 100 years old. And it was only in the 1990s that we began to explore the need for these types of competencies. And they were advanced, the multicultural counseling competencies, initially by Dr. Daryl Wing-Soo, that all of us should be aware of, right? And then in 2003, the advocacy competencies came in, and they were later updated by Toporek and Judy Daniels. And they really enhanced the competency scope and the depth. It was in 2015 that Ratz and his colleagues developed the multicultural social justice counseling competencies, which really drives the point that all of these are aiming to make our society more just for all peoples. Everyone should have the experience of feeling like an equal in the tapestry that is humanity, right? So this link here will take you to the competencies themselves. Now, within the advocacy competencies, we have various dimensions, right? Two of them, extent of client involvement in advocacy and the level of advocacy intervention. And we focus on addressing systemic barriers. And we know that all counselor training involves the development of knowledge, skills, and behaviors. What do you need to know? What are the techniques or skills that you need to know to apply? And what are the behaviors that you can engage in that will help you to facilitate the application of these competencies? You can do this by collaborating with clients or client groups and advocate on behalf of them, or you can help them to advocate for themselves. So there are various ways that you can enter this process. You can help the client to verbalize what are the ways that the systems they live in create barriers so that they feel like they are somehow stifled from being able to accomplish what they wish to accomplish. Now, there are three levels from the micro to the macro that you can work through the competencies: the individual or student level, the community level. You can enter at the organization level or at the school level for client groups, or large scale at the public arena, which is advocacy at the very, very largest level that you can go. There are 6 domains that inform this. Client and student empowerment is critical. Client and student advocacy. Now, the empowerment is just what it alludes to. You help the client to feel empowered to advocate for themselves. The advocacy is that if I know my privilege and I know my position in this space that I inhabit, then I can use that power and leverage it to support my client or my student. We do that all the time. We may not even know we're doing it. So being able to identify the ways that we can do that. We can create community collaborations where we do outreach to stakeholders that are impacted by all of this, and then develop ways to work with them closely. We can advocate at the systemic level, which is greater than the sum of its parts. We can take collective action, or we can do sociopolitical advocacy. At the end of this webinar, our last discussion point will be the implications of all of this and how we can apply it. We can take it and make it actionable at every one of these levels. Now, this leads me to the multicultural social justice counseling competencies. This is a very well-known image that Ratz and his colleagues developed. And it should be in every multicultural counseling book you ever saw. We argue it should be in every introductory counseling book that you ever read. So we encourage you to become acquainted and explore these competencies in depth. In fact, you can take this and put it up wherever you practice so you can remember that this should guide everything that you do in your counseling sessions or in your group sessions. And you need to not only understand the identities involved here, you need to pay attention to your own identities that bring privilege with them. You need to understand the identities that marginalize you as a counselor. And we can hold both. Both of those identities can coexist within each of us, depending on what we are talking about, right? And we also need to be able to understand and know and engage our clients in what they perceive to be their own privileged identities or their own marginalized identities. Now, all of that begins with the counselor's self-awareness. Why? Because you don't know what you don't know. And the only way that you can really unpack and understand the places of privilege and marginalization that you yourself hold is to really delve into them and explore them deeply. You know that if you're in a counseling training program, you are writing reflection papers about everything that you are learning. And that is part of the process of unpacking, understanding, and diving deeper. And then you write those papers, and hopefully you are having opportunity to really talk about it among yourselves so that you can dive into the process of understanding who you are and reckoning with whatever hard truths are there, so that you know what are the things, the filters that you carry that are going to color how you approach your clients. And this happens in multiple spaces and places. And so at any given time, you may have the opportunity to experience this in action, and you need to be able to respond to it accordingly, right? So we continually want you to reflect about your training journey. You're asked to get beyond yourself. You go through yourself, get beyond yourself, look at the client's worldview, which is our next level of awareness, the yellow circle here. And then me showing up as a counselor and the client showing up as a human create a synergistic relationship that will hopefully help the client to resolve whatever their conflicts are, whatever their struggles are, to participate in their own healing. As I facilitate that process of sitting with them and holding space and inviting these vulnerable disclosures that we all know are really a privilege of the counseling profession, because these people are really coming to us and saying, I'm going to trust you with my life here, right? And I need you to see me, I need you to hear me, I need you to understand me and show up for me. And this is not an easy task. And in our opinion, as counselor educators, we are called to do this work as a labor of love and a desire to better humanity, yes? And then all of these things result in our counseling and advocacy interventions. So as we get informed about what it means to be a multiculturally competent and socially just counselor, then we show up and we unpack and we help, hopefully, to transform the experience of that client so that they can become their best selves, right? This is the goal of all counseling. How can I make your life better for you? How can I help you resolve whatever brought you to me to begin with? This is a never-ending process. It is iterative, it is circular, and it is progressive. And I think that we should, in our opinion, we should center these things and we should invite them to be an ongoing developmental journey for us as counselors and counselor educators and for the client. Now, Dr. Heightened is going to help us dig deeper into the principles of social justice and intersectionality. Thank you.
Thank you. So in addition to advocacy, it's important that our counselor training should include multicultural issues, social justice, and intersectionality. But let's break those pieces down just a little bit. So as we're introducing counselors and training to multicultural issues in counseling, oftentimes they're doing that at the onset of their educational journey. And it's so important that it's not just something that's showing up in the one class. And I think Dr. Puig alluded to this as well. It should be something that's showing up across courses. I'm also quite aware that I'm preaching to the choir as we talk about how important it is for this to show up multiple times and that it relates across all points of counselor training. Intersectionality, as defined by Crenshaw, one of the things we know is it can help counselors in training to understand the importance of multiple identities on an individual client lived experience. So it helps us to understand our clients in context, right? Not just this piece or this two-dimensional presentation, but it's so important for us to understand our clients for all of the different intersections in which they hold and which they live. It's also important that we understand and embrace the tenets of social justice. It's a critical step for beginning counselors. So social justice has, of course, been described as the fifth force in counseling, and it has increasingly had a role in the largest counseling organizations around the world, including ACA and ACEs. It's a multifaceted approach in which counselors strive to simultaneously promote human development and the common good. Right? So when we think about what our work is as counselors, we are supporting the growth, the development, the healing of our clients, but also we are addressing the common good. We're addressing the context in which our clients live. This approach includes empowerment of individuals and groups, as well as active confrontation of injustice and inequality, right? So it's not just in the room with the client, but what happens outside of the room? What does that look like when we're thinking about our clients' well-being going forward? Thus, counselors can direct attention to 4 critical principles that guide their work: equity, access, participation, and harmony. And as I think about the different settings that counselors work in, we think about how this shows up in schools, in communities, in career centers, in counseling, counseling that caters to marriage and family counseling, that type of thing. It's so important that we're thinking about how these pieces present in those spaces. So counselors can't separate counseling from social justice. Both are necessary for helping clients achieve long-term optimal psychological health and well-being. And lastly, as we think about Crenshaw's definition of intersectionality, it's always important for us to understand where this is coming from. So it's a framework that helps us to explore the dynamic between coexisting identities and connected systems of oppression. It's important for us to hold this as we think about the context in which our clients live. It's important for us to think about how often multiply minoritized or multiply marginalized identities might intersect and show up in the way that our clients experience the world and in the way that society responds to our clients, right? And so it's important also understanding individual contexts really helps us to be effective in our practice as counselors, effective in our work, also and effective in our advocacy.
Thank you so much. And so here's the implications for everything we've talked to you about this afternoon. The idea is that this is the so what and what now, right? It's like we know that we are living in challenging times. Everywhere you look, all over the world, there's conflict, strife. Mm-hmm. There are groups of people being marginalized, oppressed, erased, killed, you name it. You open the news feed and it's all in there. And so counselors can play a pivotal role by entering into these advocacy spaces and trying to advocate for the clients in various domains, right? And this table offers examples of how you do the client-student empowerment.
Yes.
How do you support a client in becoming courageous enough and brave enough to attend to a difficult situation and, advocate for themselves, right? The example here is helping them to write a letter to their boss or to their teacher saying, hey, I am having difficulty with this. Can we talk about it? And then you can be there to not only help them craft the words, but also maybe do role plays about how to do it. There are myriad ways that you can take your own skills and apply them in the session to facilitate the client exploring how to advocate for themselves. The other piece is that you can advocate for them. You can stand up and say, hey, with permission from your client or your client group, you can say, I represent this person, these persons. I have a close relationship with them, and I am able to tell you that they are in a circumstance right now that is getting in the way of their being completely able to do A, B, or C, whatever it is, right? And you can be the voice for the client if the client themselves or the student are not able to use their voice, right? Because sometimes that's what is called for. And we need to be, able to step up and do that for them. Community collaboration is when we use our privilege and our knowledge and our skill set to help a group of people to facilitate their ability to get whatever it is that they need. In this instance, the example is reaching out to a local city council to advocate for a group to be able to have meetings in a dedicated space, right? That's a simple ask that you might bring to a setting that the clients or the client group have identified that they could enter, right? If that is possible within the context that you live in. Systems advocacy is when you are trying to do outreach or intervene on behalf of a large group of people who are experiencing marginalization or disenfranchisement. And you can talk to people in the systems that they inhabit who have the power to do something about their situation so that it can be made better, right? And that's how you enter at a systemic level. And some counselors even serve as mediators of this challenging conversation. One thing that occurs to me that I haven't put on the slides here is that the Association of Specialists in Group Work developed a really good resource. If you go to their website, asgw.org, you can download a free resource in English or Spanish about strategies to have difficult conversations in a group setting. And they're really useful to apply to a particularly thorny issue or an issue that creates a lot of emotionality and can facilitate that people who stand up at opposing spaces, right, or a continuum can actually still respectfully come together to talk about the issue. So I highly recommend that you avail yourself of this resource to do systems advocacy. Collective action also can be part of how we advocate. I provide here in this table an example, a local example. I am in Gainesville, Florida, where we have had a lot of policy changes that impact LGBTQ students. This was national news, the Don't Say Gay bill that the administration passed and that affects students in K-12 and beyond. And a school counselor helped to organize a protest. So the students had a walkout from the school and they were able to use their voice and advocate for themselves and stand in support of LGBTQ rights in this particular community. And the link here takes you to the article that discusses this event. This is another example of advocacy as a collective action. And finally, socio-political advocacy is really when we go to the people who make the policies, right? Our program here at the University of Florida, where I live, has taken students to Tallahassee to do advocacy on behalf of the counseling profession and counselors who are practicing, not only in Florida, but across the country. Although we know that, the Tallahassee policymakers can only create policies that affect the state, we know there are many other states that are also facing the same dilemmas. So this is the kind of advocacy that also the American Counseling Association does when they take counselors to Washington, D.C. to go and visit senators, congresspeople, and they are really advocating for mental health support initiatives that will only help people who are facing systemic problems or who lived in marginalized status across their communities. So Dr. Haynes-Tovey and I want to thank you for showing up today and listen to our idea behind this notion that we need to be part of the solution. We need to make commitment to our clients by committing to advocate for those who are unfortunately in positions of marginalization and disenfranchisement. And those groups continue to be affected, and they will show up in our offices. So we need to support them and be ready to do that for them in an efficacious way. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
We will take questions. Here are references, and I believe that you will get the slides from our Springer Publishing sponsors.
Thank you, Ana and Latoya. We really appreciate you taking the time to present today. It's been great so far. We do have some questions. Just as a reminder to everybody, we will be sending out the recording for this webinar within 5 to 7 business days. The first question we have here, just a reminder, if anybody has questions in the interim, please put them in the Q&A box in your control panel, and I will ask them. The first question we had is from Jose. In what class would this book be implemented at a CMHC program?
Okay, great question, Jose. Thank you for that.
Sure. Christina mentioned in the chat Foundations of MHC, but are there other courses beyond that you recommend?
Yes, absolutely.
Thanks.
We think that this is these concepts are introductory. And we argue that this is the perfect topic for an introduction to counseling class. It could be a supplemental to a techniques class. Yes. I think, and I think Dr. Haynes-Tovey will agree, who's one of my co-authors, that we believe strongly that these issues, all of these topics should be foundational. So any introductory class from the very first semester that students enroll in.
Absolutely. And one of the things that I've seen done really well is having this text be used in introductory courses and carried along after students have already purchased to be used in a practicum or a techniques course. So it could be used across 2 courses.
Yes.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Jose also mentioned, provided this comment, which is sometimes it's very difficult. I have a colleague at a private university in Texas that was told not to talk about the Middle East conflict in class by superiors. Do you have any recommendations for that? Especially both of you are with public universities, but have you heard within your colleagues within the counseling field or counseling education that are recommending certain ways to approach these things?
That's a great point. And I could tell you that it's my lived experience that we are essentially not allowed to bring up certain topics in classrooms. And if we do, students are allowed to record us and then turn the recording over to the administration, specifically to the legal counsel of the university to determine if we have reached the new policies. This is a very thorny issue, and what I would do if I were you living in that context is that I would invite my students who so desire to join in a conversation with me as facilitator around any topic, whether it's the war in Gaza, whether it is the LGBTQ anti-trans legislation that is happening across the country, whether it's the political landscape that we inhabit presently. So I think as a counselor educator, I have agency about what to create in terms of opportunities for students who wish to have these challenging conversations. Now, I agree, sometimes you find yourself in the midst of such a conversation because students who feel strongly about these issues are going to broach them, right? And so you need to be able to hold that tension between what the institution is asking you to do and what you feel you're morally responsible to do, right? Sometimes the two don't align, and you need to make an executive decision about what is it that you are comfortable broaching and how are you going to frame it and present it and offer it to the students. That's how I would do it, right? I would try to, in essence, give students who are uncomfortable the opportunity to recuse themselves from the conversation. And it is an unfortunate truth that sometimes the people who need it the most are going to walk out. The people who need to hear those conversations are going to choose not to engage. And the bottom line is that you cannot make them. I hope that sheds some light on that answer. Yeah.
The next question was from somebody who's anonymous, who mentioned the following. Liberation, quote unquote, is an idea that is familiar to many lay people. In other words, many potential clients who are not counselor educators. The term emancipatory communitarianism can come off as an academic term that could potentially be inaccessible for those without counselor education training.
Absolutely.
And you're probably imagining what this is. And the question is, how can this obstacle be unpacked?
Yeah, that's a great point. Thank you for that, Anonymous. I can tell you this. Clients don't need to know what emancipatory communitarianism is for me to adopt it and use it in sessions. This is an academic term. It is a mouthful, and I would not go around teaching clients what EC is because it's not necessary. What is necessary is that I learn how to use the framework to inform the theories that I am going to adopt as a counselor in the sessions that I'm going to deliver. So I can teach this to students of counseling, and I can let them know that, and Dr. Haynes-Tobey, jump in if you wish, that I think that we are not in the business of confusing people who are not academics with language like emancipatory communitarianism or even liberation psychology. But I can tell you this, when you're being oppressed, you know what it feels like.
Yes.
And if you're a client that shows up being oppressed and being silenced and being manhandled, you are going to show up as a distressed human who needs my support. And I'm in it all the way. I'm going to go there with you, and I'm going to do everything I can to help you. That's my answer.
I'd also add that there may be moments where a client may bring something like this in. If it is helpful for that particular client within that particular context, then of course we can work to unpack that. But it really is about, is this something that's helpful for the client? Is this something that the client has brought in and said it was helpful? Or is this something that I'm interested in sharing with the client to show them that I know how to use these types of terms? When we are in session and we're working with our client groups, our students, and I'm thinking about school counselors when I say students, it's really about, the question is, how helpful is it to bring in these types of terms? And there may be times where a student has heard about it, or a client has heard about it, and they want to unpack with us, and that's absolutely okay. And we think about that in the spirit of transparency, congruence, right? And authenticity. But it's not absolutely necessary to utilize this framework to bring in that specific term.
Yep. Thank you.
Excellent. The next question was from Matthew, who asks, in states with anti-LGBTQ laws requiring counselors to out minors to their parents, how can we ethically serve at-risk youth, i.e. via informed consent waivers? Many of us have stopped seeing minors due to these laws.
That is heart-wrenching. I am, it is appalling that this is where we are in this situation. And I think that it is a very challenging mandate, and of course, very destructive to the dignity of humans, that it should not happen. That's a difficult position to be in, and I guess you or folks have decided to stop the work so that they don't find themselves in these positions. I think there are people in the community who are willing to sit on the ledge and entertain, making space and time for kids who are not able to feel seen and supported. I can tell you an example from my own personal life. I know lots of instructors, teachers, and counselors, school counselors, who are in local schools here in Alachua County where the law is in effect. And I know that they are subverting the dominant paradigm by creating very unique ways to identify themselves as allies. For example, I know a local principal at an elementary school who took the lanyards that the teachers wear with the keys hanging on them and made them rainbow lanyards. And every teacher and counselor who feels that they are there to support students is wearing one of those lanyards. And students have learned to identify them so that they can approach that individual to talk about their situation. And that's just a small way of offering support that is a little bit surreptitious and may be a little bit safer for everyone involved. If I am in a situation where I have a child who is not being supported, I would reach out to the parents and I would try to initiate a conversation with them. And I know that this is a difficult, hairy kind of, and even risky thing to do. But really what we are here for is to support the well-being of the child. So if a child is suicidal because they don't feel supported, then it is more unethical not to do something than it would be, right? So it's about your own barometer. What is your moral compass? What is your tolerance for distress in a situation like that? And Dr. Haynes-Toby, I don't know if you have other thoughts about it.
A recent study that I'm finishing up now. I've had the privilege of talking to school counselors around the country, and we're seeing pieces, issues show up like this, and I can go through the list of states. It feels like we're always talking about the same states. But one of the things I always am wanting to add to the conversation is the same things are happening in other states where they may not yet be legalized or sanctioned yet, but people are doing it a little more quietly. People are being silenced a little more quietly, and being told that, this was never an issue, never part of the conversation. Why are you bringing these things in? And one of the things that I've always been proud to see, and also noticing how unfortunate it is that we have to to engage in these types of practices, the different ways that school counselors and school mental health professionals and teachers have been able to work in ways to employ advocacy and their positionality as allies to circumvent in the name of saving students, in the name of making sure that we are acknowledging the very real reality of the heightened suicide risk for students who don't identify as heterosexual, students who don't identify as cisgendered, right? And so it's going to be so important that we are finding ways and connecting with. So it's not this thing that you can ever do in isolation. It's always going to be something where you're engaging other folks who are in the work that you're doing and who hold the different positions that you do as well. And the purpose of it always for counselors is for the benefit of our clients. And when we're thinking about that within the school context, that's going to be for the benefit of our students. We're asking the question, do we uphold these particular systems that are quite oppressive, or do we connect with other people in the field who are finding ways to work around and make sure that our students are not harmed? And sometimes that's going to be advocacy at a systems level, but on the day-to-day, on the ground, that's going to be connecting with other folks, maybe in my district, in my state, who are also saying that I'm going to put students first. Here's how I do it. Here's how I do it in a way that I'm not done or I'm not gone next year, but I'm still able to be a person that students can trust, right?
Yeah. Thank you.
And in no way are we arguing that this is easy, but it's important that we consider, and I think it was a great question.
All right. And then let's see, we have time for one more question. And that question would be, what other resources would you recommend for counselor educators to help broach challenging conversations with students in the classroom?
Well, I can tell you that our book is full of examples of cases and questions associated with that, and ways that you can create vignettes, that students can unpack together or individually, depending on how you want to present it to the class. I think that some students learn best by doing. Yes. And that is creating the role play opportunities in the classroom, so that they sit in that hot chair and try to figure out what words would be most supportive for someone who presents with X, Y, or Z challenge. It is always humbling to sit across someone who is being crushed in their spirit and just in their humanity. And I think it's very privileged work that we do to be able to provide space and time, and so do it and keep doing it, and the more you do it, the braver you become. I can tell you that the person I was 20 years ago would shiver at the thought of broaching any of these things. But in terms of tangible resources, go to ASGW, download their resources related to how to do this in a group setting, so that you can, because it's kind of hairy, right? When you're dealing with more than one person in real time. But it's also, you can apply it to individual work, or to small work, to dyad work, or even if you have 3 or 4 people in the room. You really have to just do it. Just sit, give yourself the chance to sit with that opportunity to broach the topic in real time. I think that ACA has resources on their website also. If you're a member of ACA, there are the Counselors for Social Justice. Is a subdivision that is very, very strong in all of these principles that we have discussed today. The Association for Multicultural Counseling and Development also has resources that you can avail yourself of. So it's just doing a little homework and getting your hands on those things. Yeah,
You'll notice at the end of many of the chapters, we are pointing to the very resources that Dr. Puig is describing,
that's right.
as well as how to engage those resources.
Mhm.
I'll say even from feedback that I've received from students, students have found it really helpful. I've had students come back and say they practice some of those with friends who were not in their classes, not in the program, or with family members. It's also helped them to engage conversations with members of their family or members of their communities that they might have been a little more hesitant to engage.
Yep.
Excellent. I just want to say, as you'll see on this slide, there's information about requesting a desk copy or purchasing a copy. The discount there is webinar 24 for 25%. For those folks who are interested in the book in the chat, we will follow up with you after this, as well as anybody else that's interested in potentially adopting this book. Feel free to reach out to us and we will be in touch with you promptly. I want to thank Anna and LaToya again. This was an incredible presentation today. We are thrilled and with everything you discussed, and we appreciate especially your honesty and sharing this valuable information to our audience. We also want to thank everyone for spending time with us today. I mentioned before, if you're interested in purchasing the book, Foundations in Becoming a Professional Counselor, use the code webinar24 at springerpub.com. And I want to reiterate that the recorded session will be available on springerpub.com within 5 to 7 business days. Finally, thank you again to Anna and LaToya, and we want to wish everyone a great afternoon, and we look forward to you joining us for future Springer Publishing webinars. Have a great afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.